Alright, today I want to talk a little bit about the pursuit of happiness. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. It's guaranteed us by our Constitution. At the same time, we have the obvious predominance of happiness in the infant, the human infant who's well taken care of, spends a lot of its day in contentment and joy, till hunger interferes, till being too cold or too hot or desiring to be picked up. The human infant is an interesting study that way. As long as its needs are met, it tends to be content. And maybe that's the ultimate prototype for understanding happiness throughout the whole lifespan. As long as your needs are met, contentment and joy are natural expressions of living. So philosophers and mental health professionals and individual citizens, regular folks, are all interested in this notion of happy, and it's kind of elusive. There's too many definitions for it. There are immature understandings of happiness, and then there are enriched understandings of happiness. The word is overused, and so I'm offering an alternative to the word happy. And I have struggled with this through the decades as a therapist, how to talk about this best with clients, with people. The spoiled child is pursuing good feelings around the clock with no limits, and the spoiled child is far from happy. If you're going to use the spoiled child as your image or your ideal of happiness, you're in serious trouble. Often the spoiled children end up to be the most anxious and most depressed individuals on the earth. So I've got this struggle going on. I settled on the word fulfillment, and now I'm actually still in search of something more. A lot of people, in terms of modern psychology, the last decade or so, are interested in positive psychology and the upside of living. Maslow got into the idea of self-actualization back in the 60s and 70s, and that, to me, that represented a better, more sophisticated notion of happiness and what we're trying to all universally achieve than the standard or conventional notions of happiness. So I've stumbled across a Greek word that it turns out I think fits very, very well, and the word is Eudaimonia. Eudaimonia. And of course, we're going to spell it right over here for you. Actually use it a little more carefully, a little more thoughtfully. And in order to do that, part of what we want to do is we want to determine what the essential elements of happiness are. More than pleasant feeling states, and this is important as starting recognition. It's more than. So if happiness, real happiness, is going to be more than pleasant feeling states, what are the other pieces that are required for it? And those triumphant moments, those very peak moments, they mean so little if there isn't somebody to share it with. And then, so much of what feeds us in terms of the nourishment of living has to do with others and love. And so I think when you begin to look past infancy and you talk about happiness as it evolves or develops for the maturing individual, more and more we see the interpersonal component is critical, and it varies. At a certain stage of life, that interpersonal component really sort of shows up as, can you fall in love and find your special other? At a certain point in adolescence, can you fit in? Can you find your peer group that accepts you? And then later, with more maturity, are you fitting into your community? Are you a contributing member of your society? Do you feel connected, to the bigger social picture? So happiness at any given phase of life beyond infancy, well, even in infancy, has always got an interpersonal component because mom and dad are you know, meeting the needs of the infant, making sure it's not hungry or cold or whatever, and touch, hugging and affection and whatnot. These are basic needs too. So again, even from the time of infancy, the interpersonal aspect is critical. So it can't just be feeling states because it takes two. So, you know, we're not just talking about me feeling good, we're talking about me and you feeling good. Not that I can't have happy moments by myself, but sustainable happiness, eudaimonia over the course of a lifetime would require interpersonal outcomes, interpersonal payoffs, interpersonal dynamics that support well-being. And even that word support, you know, how do you be happy and get happy and stay happy without support, without others? So we have to expand the definition beyond good feelings to include the other. It's multifaceted, then we have to conclude it's multifaceted, and then we also recognize, I'm suggesting, that happiness evolves over the course of the lifespan. And this raises then the question, and we go from happiness and the simple idea, the simpleton's idea of simply having good feelings, to the more sophisticated notion of the Greek philosophers in Eudaimonia. What do love and morality have to do with happiness? And what we begin to find out is they have everything to do with happiness. So I ask you the question, would you be able to cheat your way to happiness? Would you be able to lie your way to happiness? Would you be able to climb to happiness over the hurts and the exploitation inflicted? To recognize that some of the most popular patterns of living and relating to living ruin the potential for people to achieve this fuller and richer sense of happiness, of personal fulfillment, of eudaimonia. We do worship the false gods, you know, the money, the fame, the fortune, you know, the things, the procurement of things, the acquisition of stuff, power, even things like freedom, the pursuit of freedom could ruin your happiness, although obviously the absence of freedom could also ruin your happiness. We're not smart, we're not wise about this pursuit. So we start out with a guarantee by the Constitution, and then our culture of mores from there on make it almost impossible for us to find our way back to the path to real happiness. Because we get caught up in these false avenues, these false pursuits that are really self-defeating when it comes to the actual achievement of life satisfaction, of that deeper kind of happiness. So one of the things that Aristotle, one of the big three back in ancient Greek philosophy, he holds that virtue and its exercise is the most important element, the constituent element that comprises eudaimonia. But meanwhile, other external material things, the stuff that the Americans and the West seem to be hung up on, also play a role. But there was an argument put forth by the Stoics that took this a little further, disagreed with Aristotle, and suggested that, in fact, virtue was really the whole story. And I want to spend some time discussing that because I think that's sort of critical. And as we look to apply this concept to addiction, I think some of the ways in which this is apropos, kind of bringing this concept into this domain, should be kind of obvious. The addict, busy pursuing good feelings and trying to get rid of bad feelings, you know, based on the self-medication hypothesis, clearly has become enslaved in a pattern that will never result in happiness, in particular because it completely ignores the role of the conscience. The slippery conscience is what allows addiction to begin and to take hold and to advance. The argument that at some point the brain becomes diseased has very little to do with what happens in the initial formative stages of an addiction. The vulnerability of falling into it in the first place. Most really truly happy people in this larger sense of the term of eudaimonia don't get addicted. If they use substances as part of interpersonal celebration, as part of the actual expansion of consciousness and the appreciation of living, that would be the only use pattern that you'd find in people who have general happiness. They wouldn't, even if they had Irish Catholic genes and they were susceptible to alcoholism, they wouldn't get into a pattern of daily use because of the conflict that would occur within that would undermine the clean conscience. And so that's what the Stoics suggest, self-denial and self-deprivation as a means of strengthening one's character. And that's really the application of Stoicism in modern life. That stand in life won't allow the conscience to be bypassed or to be trivialized in the person's ongoing, choosing of a way of living, of a way of being. So here's alcohol, here's a substance. First of all, is it against the law? Is somebody getting harmed if I do it? That'd be a consideration right up front. Am I going to lie to somebody about it? That'd be a consideration right up front. Is it going to diminish my capacity to follow through with my other ethical commitments, like drinking and driving? And so the person that has that solid foundation of a conscience that they're in tune with, that speaks to them and kind of serves to keep them in line, or supports them in drawing lines and living between them, it doesn't permit this usage to go anywhere else where it's not augmenting or enhancing the process of good living. See, it doesn't fit the character, it doesn't fit the person. So isn't it true before AA came along that addiction and drunkenness in particular were moral issues? Well, the truth is there's still moral issues. That really never changed. Calling it a disease didn't change the fact that it begins to involve behaviors you're ashamed of, behaviors you feel a need to hide, lying and cheating and stealing. As these things occur, the conscience is deteriorating, but in order for these things to occur in the first place, the conscience had to be a little slippery to begin with. That fall from one's own grace takes place as a natural part of addiction's progression. And this is what I'm saying. Somebody that's got their feet solidly planted in the grounding of their own conscience is not going to let that happen. They just don't let that happen. They have something that depresses them. Their conscience hasn't deteriorated to the point where they suddenly feel the need to self-medicate. They feel the need for something, but those things that exist on the other side of the tracks in terms of the drawing of the lines, in reference to their conscience, don't appeal to them. Don't show up and knock on their door and say, "Try me." Why does so much addiction begin in adolescence? Conscience that's beginning to develop and form itself. A lot of unanticipated pain just in terms of leaving childhood behind or accumulated over the course of having a horrible childhood. All the interpersonal challenge that begins to shake the world of the teenager quite naturally and predictably. And so here, your conscience isn't going to stop you from pursuing pain relief. There's still that infantile need to prioritize not having pain. So the mind of the adolescent is particularly well suited to be vulnerable to the sales pitch from the devil, quote unquote. So I don't believe in the devil per se, but you get the metaphor, right? Try one of these. You have a lot of pain. This will help you feel better. You have a desire to party and celebrate living, and you're unable to do that these days. And by the way, your conscience is not so firmly grounded and set in stone in terms of the principles by which you live, so you've got some flexibility. And after all, part of the chip on your shoulder is other people don't seem to be true to their conscience. Why the hell should I? Like my parents, or the quote-unquote community leaders or government leaders. Everybody's sinning and cheating, and I'm seeing some of them get rich, and that sort of thing. I'm not surrounded by people who are supporting the idea of me developing a solid sense of my own morality. I'm not being encouraged, I'm not being supported, I'm not being role modeled, I'm not shown the example. So should we be surprised that there is an easily bypassed, partially developed conscience in adolescence? I don't think so. The egocentrism that characterized childhood hasn't completely worn off yet. And so, what has supported the other centrism, awareness, and commitment and dedication that you might find in a particularly healthy young person? Living outside of one's ethics produces psychic or emotional pain that cannot be assuaged by stacking up the good feelings of gratifying or pleasant experiences. I can't assemble enough good feelings to silence the toxic static that is continuously flowing from my disturbed conscience. And then you can see what happens is the person doubles down with their strategy to manage pain. Rather than get good and take a stand in the favor of what my conscience is telling me, I go in the other direction. I take more drugs, or I drink more, or I do more acting out in order to silence those bad feelings. And now the rabbit hole has sucked me in like a black hole, and it's very, very difficult to come out of. And as I was alluding to earlier, so much of what recovery about is really repair in the moral domain. A lot of fixing up stuff that got damaged in the moral domain. And then after that, looking at the idea that there was probably developmental arrest, that there's building, first stage building of other elements of the conscience that hadn't yet had a chance to develop for the person. So this morality issue enters into it in a big, big way. And I would like to bring back the notion that addiction is indeed a moral issue, and begin to confront this, not from the standpoint of judging others, but from the standpoint of this enlarged concept of what happiness consists of. And you just got down a dead-end path, the rabbit hole, you went down that path, and if you really want to be happy, your conscience is required. And, the repair of what you messed up, and then, the initial build-out. And sobriety alone does not bring that to an addict. Sobriety alone doesn't bring that. Now you can see what they call the pink cloud phenomena happening, because as a person recovers, they feel themselves as moving in the right direction of repairing the conscience, of becoming a person that lives from moral commitments once again. And so that begins to elevate their sense of self-esteem and set the table for some element of that enriched happiness, that eudaimonia, to occur for them. But it needs to continue. In other words, you have to continue, A, to live true to the conscience, and B, where there are holes or gaps or missing links in terms of the structure of one's conscience, they need to be repaired. And I want to be clear here that I'm not talking about conscience as if it was some sort of monolithic set of rules and principles. I think it's a very individualized phenomenon that each person has to develop their own sense of their own conscience. But in the end, we do tend to find some things that are universal or near universal relative to what a clear conscience, a clean and fully formed conscience, obligates us to do, that mandates us in the way that we be with ourselves and with others on the planet. Giving a shit about your fellow man, and it's just, now there's as many different manifestations of that as there are people, but clearly there's a difference between caring on some level and not giving a shit at all about your fellow man on another level. So we go back to the people that try to lie, cheat, and steal their way to happiness, and no can do. They're missing some very, very critical piece of normal, healthy, emotional, mental development, social development, that leaves us requiring a conscience and the ability to live in accord with it in a pretty much consistent and complete way. I remember I had one of those little daily diary things that had a pithy saying for each day, and one that stuck with me was, there's no softer pillow than a clean conscience. And so you want a good night's sleep, be a good person as you lay down at night, and know that you're a good person as you lay down at night. Now, is everything going great in your life as you lie there as a good person? No. But if you're handling the things that aren't going great like a not so good person, you can see that your solution is making matters worse. And that's the recognition that all addicts need to come by. I'm going to come back to this. This is just the beginning of the discussion. This is my first day of declaring my interest in using the word eudaimonia.